Well, hello, my name is Evan Gregory, and this is Bible Answers. We're going to be finishing up our study in Acts chapter 18 tonight. And as always, if you've got a question or comment, leave a comment, and I will respond to it. And so, getting right into the lesson, remember last week we were finishing Acts chapter 18. Paul was in Corinth. We see earlier that there were really, Jews were not happy with Paul. And we see where in verses 14 through 17, where we see that basically Paul is brought before one of the Roman leaders, Gallio, and then we see where basically the Jews were wanting him, basically Gallio to do something to him, and then Gallio ultimately understands why they're doing this. He recognizes it's part of their old law. Or the problem is with their law and not with the Roman law or anything like that. And we see where Gallio really doesn't want anything to do with him. And so that takes us to verses 18 through 23. And so again, Paul is at Corinth, and he's eventually going to make his way back towards Jerusalem. And so it says that he took leave of the brethren and sailed for Syria. Priscilla and Aquila were with him. He had his hair cut at Cancria, for he had taken a vow, and he came to Ephesus and left them there. But he himself entered the synagogue and reasoned with the Jews. When they asked him to stay a longer time with them, he did not consent, but took leave of them, saying, I must by all means keep this coming feast in Jerusalem, but I will return again to you, God willing. And he sailed from Ephesus, and when he had landed at Caesarea, he had gone up and greeted the church. He went down to Antioch. After he had spent some time there, he departed and went over the region of Galatia and Phrygia in order, strengthening all the disciples. So, really, what we're seeing here is a continuation of the narrative of Paul's travels. And, again, we see Priscilla and Aquila. We see them also being mentioned in Acts chapter 18, that he meets these two. And one thing to point out, and I think one thing of significance, if you're paying attention, is what Paul did when he was at Cancria. It says that he had his hair cut off, for he had taken a vow. And if you're familiar with the Bible, uh, you would recognize this in regards to possibly Jewish a Jewish vow. All right, that this was um, pretty standard practice for a lot of Jews. And when they have, I think specifically with a Nazarite vow, that it involves the growing out of the hair and cutting off the hair, so on and so forth. And so again, it raises the question as to why is he doing this? Because as we see in Acts chapter 15, that that is pretty clear that Gentiles that don't have to keep the old law and order to be saved, or in any way be justified towards God. And so, why does he do this? And you know, a lot of people have different opinions on this, and I think what's going on is kind of in line with what we also see in this same section of him going to keep a feast in Jerusalem. That if we recall, that we know that Paul wants to be all things to all men. That when he's around Jews, he will become as a Jew. When he's around Gentiles, he will become as a Gentile. Why? And so the hopes that he might save some. And I think this is what is going on here. That he's not doing these things as he thinks that he is required to do so by the old law, but it seems like, I think it's most probable to me, that he's doing these things. There's something going on, and in his mind, doing these things will lead to more conversation with Jews. That he will be more, maybe more pleasant to be around for the Jew if they see him doing these certain things. But I definitely don't think that he's doing these things in keeping of the old law. And also, some have made the point that it may have just been just any some vow in general, that it's not necessarily in keeping with uh, a Jewish vow in regards to the old law. And I don't quite buy that. But again, it that is possible as well. But we see, regardless of that, that he had taken this vow. He had his hair cut off, and he goes to Ephesus. He leaves Priscilla and Aquila. And where does he go? Well, again, he goes back to the synagogues, reasoning with the Jews. And so again, like what was already mentioned, he wants to go back to Jerusalem. So again, this he's in Corinth. He crosses over to Ephesus, and now he's working his way back to Jerusalem. And why he wants to keep the coming feast. And so again, the Jews have several feasts that they keep throughout the year. We're not necessarily sure on this, on what exactly is going on here, but there's a feast going on and he wants to be there, and so he's making his way back to Jerusalem, and he's also as he makes his way there, he's also again continuing to teach, continue to meet with other Christians. We see that he had gone up to Jerusalem and greeted the church there while he was making his way, and then we see where he actually goes down to Antioch again, and we see where he basically goes throughout this area and strengthens the disciples. Again, spending time with these churches that are in the area, also up in Galatia and Persia, and then you're getting close to the region of Asia as well. And so, again, we see where really this is a continuation of his travels, that he's spending a lot of time traveling, teaching others. Again, this is Paul's business, and so which takes us to verses 24 through 28. It says, "Now a certain Jew named Apollos, born at Alexandria, an eloquent man and mighty in scriptures, came to Ephesus. This man had been instructed in the way of the Lord, and being fervent in spirit, he spoke and talked accurately the things of the Lord, though he knew only the baptism of John. So he began to speak boldly in the synagogue. When Aquila and Priscilla heard him, they took him aside and explained to him the way of God more accurately. And when he desired to cross to Achaia, the brethren wrote, exhorting the disciples to receive him. And when he arrived, he greatly helped those who had believed through grace, for he vigorously refuted the Jews publicly, showing from the scriptures that Jesus is the Christ." And so we meet Apollos and listen to how he's described. Okay. He's fervent in spirit, he's instructed in the way of the Lord, he's mighty in the scriptures, an eloquent man, so he could speak, he knew what he was talking about, and he could deliver the message effectively. But there was one thing that he was missing. So he spoke and taught accurately the things of the Lord, but he only knew the baptism of John. So he only knows of really the message that was being presented by John the Baptist, and that was it. He does not know of anything else that happens afterwards. Now, if you recall what John the Baptist spoke about, so again, he preached a baptism of repentance for remission of sins, but we also see where he spoke about the coming Messiah, that this Messiah was coming. Okay. So he knew about John, but he didn't know about Jesus. He didn't know of this Messiah in which John spoke of. And so uh, the problem here is that even though he's speaking things rightly, he does not know the full picture. There are some things that have happened that need to be cleared up, that need to be clarified for him, because at this point, if he's only speaking the baptism of John, really he's teaching things that are no longer applicable to the individuals that would be hearing him, because at that time everyone was still under the old covenant, but now after the death of Christ, one's under the new covenant, and so it's really a new law, new teachings, and so this is we why Aquila and Priscilla had to teach him the things more accurately. And so Aquila and Priscilla hear him, and notice what they do. It says they take him to the side, and so they're not uh, bashing him. They're not, or publicly refuting him. This is something different. And really, what we see throughout the New Testament is that depending upon the individual, there are differences in how really doctrinal differences are handled, and really it depends. I think it depends on the situation, and it depends on the attitudes of the individual as well. Those that won't hear or refuse to listen, or we see where they, for example, Paul may be more direct towards them, more, I don't know if harsh is the right word, but again, more direct, straight to the point, delivering that message. But we don't see that with Priscilla and Aquila. And I think that speaks of Apollos' attitude, or at least their perception of his attitude. That we see where they pull him to the side and they teach him the way of God more accurately. And apparently he just receives it. They tell him, and he's like, "Oh, I got it." And so again, we see Apollos' attitude towards the truth, that when given that truth, he readily accepts it, even if he was teaching things that weren't applicable, and really, at this point would be considered, uh, false doctrine. Again, a Christian could not be speaking these things and saying, "Hey, you have to be baptized according to the baptism of John," because that's no longer in effect. That's not true. The baptism which one follows now is the baptism of Christ. And so, again, he's speaking things that was not, at the end of the day, it was not right. And once he hears it, the truth, he accepts it, and then it says that he continued. It says that he helped those who believe through grace. He vigorously refuted the Jews publicly, showing from the scriptures that Jesus is the Christ. And so, just like what he was doing before, he was eloquent. He was mighty in the scriptures. He was, again, speaking the things of the Lord. Once he receives this new information, he goes and continues that, just like what he was doing, just with the new information, refuting the Jews publicly, showing from the scriptures that Jesus is Christ. So he was a great benefit to those who were already Christians, and very effective in delivering that message to others as well. And so that ends chapter 18. Next time, we'll start Acts chapter 19 and continue our way through the book of Acts. As always, if you have a question or comment, feel free to leave that here. Also, these videos will be uploaded to YouTube. Our YouTube page is North Columbus Church of Christ. All of these videos from the past are uploaded there, and you can see any videos that you may have missed. And as always, I hope this has been useful to y'all, and hope that you all have a good day and a good rest of the week. Thanks.